On the night of the flooding, Tony, Lourdes and their 3-month-old baby Angelina went out to get some milk in their car. It went from a normal evening to this in minutes. The cleanup is arduous, and whilst filming today we came across Enrique, a friend of Tony's family. Have you spoken to him?
¿Has podido hablar con él?
No.
We managed to speak to Tony on the phone about last Tuesday evening, when his wife and baby died in the floods.
It was like a tsunami through a gorge. Woof. It took everything with it. It was clear to me it was going to be difficult to save the baby. It was impossible to save her. Almost impossible. At that moment, I put the window down and told my wife, "Look, I'm going to get out." And she said, "No, you'll be swept away." I got out the car. I was holding onto the door with one arm and trying to get the baby with the other. But then, I was swept away.
So, and Tony, you're sounding so calm and so rational given everything that's happened.
I've cried a lot. And I'm going to try not to cry again. I'm outraged by how this could have all happened. I'm telling you, this could have been prevented. Human lives could have been saved. I hope one day there'll be justice.
Today, another 2,500 soldiers arrived in the region to help clear debris and locate bodies. The regional and national governments are still blaming each other for the public outcry over the lack of warnings. So, how did this crisis unfold? The National Weather Agency first warned of the potential for a strong storm on the 25th of October. They continued to post every day warning of heavy rain coming to the region until Tuesday, the 29th of October. That day, at 7:36 a.m., the agency published a red alert for the region of Valencia. But it wasn't until 8:14 that evening that the government issued a phone alert, 12 hours after the first warning. It was too late. The floodwaters ripped through towns and villages across the region. Valencia's regional leader, Carlos Mazón, said that the agency which measures the flow of rivers cancelled a planned alert 3 times. And here's the commander of the Army's emergency response services.
The damage is terrible, but of course the degree of destruction is so great that mobility is limited. It is so complex that it requires 2 things, discipline and patience.
At least 217 people have been killed, and it's reported that up to 2,000 people are still missing. We spotted this riverbed essentially from the motorway because of all the cars that have washed into it. Look at this red vehicle here. It's got a green marking on it. That means that the emergency services have checked it, presumably for bodies. And look here, a trickle of water today. And think, just 5 days ago, the power and the volume of the water pushed all of these vehicles and trees and debris up against the bridge. The Valencia floods will be seared into people's minds. This was the town of Chiva last Tuesday. And this morning, still bleak and ravaged, it's dealing with a building collapse from last night. Everything remains unpredictable for the residents of this region.
Ria Chatterjee reporting there. Well, joining me now from central London is Carmen Marquez Ruiz, who's the EU's Climate Pact ambassador and is from the Valencia region. Thanks for joining us. I mean, why do you think the authorities were not better prepared?
Good evening. I think that, you know, they didn't expect that this catastrophe would be so huge. they assumed that it would be a strong storm, as we normally have in the fall, that are called gota fria. But they underestimated the impact of climate change in these weather events. The scale of the storm was out of proportion, and probably they underestimated the risk for the population and for the whole region.
That's interesting that you say they underestimated the impact of climate change, because I was wondering if you think that ideology on the part of some people in local government maybe played a part.
Maybe, but I think that it is you can see that it is a trend, I think, both in terms of political parties and the population, maybe to not really take climate change seriously enough. And also, I would say that in climate change matters, we have the problem that we have the scientific evidence that the warming of the atmosphere is getting out of a required limit. But we don't. These scientific opinions and scientific evidence is not properly taken into account by our political leaders. So we have this need to take action, and both in terms of reducing emissions, in terms of taking adaptation measures that would prevent this kind of catastrophes, or that would also help us to deal with the impact of climate change. We need also to prepare to deal with these kind of emergency situations. We need also to think of how the economic recovery will be. But for the moment, we don't have this kind of action.
Can I ask you on a broader level, because your work includes what the EU does in this matter. I mean, in March this year, the European Environment Agency published its first ever climate risk assessment and concluded that Europe is not prepared for rapidly growing climate risks. Do you agree with that?
Well, if this agency got this conclusion, I would respect this kind of opinion. And I find that we are reaching a point where Europe, and in particular the Mediterranean, is a kind of frontline space for climate change, and we have to increase our preparedness. It is clear that what has happened in Valencia was not up to the required level.
But at a European Union level, I mean, has it changed its tone on climate change? I mean, it used to be a world leader in these respects, and just this week we've had a big climate conference in Colombia where people have been pointing the fingers at the EU and saying you're not doing enough.
Well, in Colombia you had a COP on biodiversity, not on climate change, although both things are connected. But I would not agree at all with the fact that the EU is lagging behind. On the contrary, the EU is leading the path in terms of climate change. You have to know that in terms of trends, the EU in the last years has reduced by half its emissions. If you compare what the EU is doing with other regions of the world, I don't think that we should be ashamed. On the contrary, climate change is a big priority of the Ursula von der Leyen European Commission. And I am convinced that we still have many things to do. But in terms of reduction of emissions and preparedness, I think we are quite advanced. But of course, the scale of the challenge is so huge that we should increase also our efforts.